Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I'm a 30-year-old male. I was having a bit of a dry patch with dating. I broke up with my fiancé and I was absolutely crushed by it. I found out that she had been cheating on me through the last 6 months of the relationship. I didn't want or need anything serious. Mainly, just wanted to see what was out there. Maybe find a friend or something. So, I made my profile, matched with a couple of women who I was attracted to, and I liked their profiles. It was a mixed result. Some of the women seemed to like me, and others weren't really all that interested. It happens though. One of the women seemed nice at first. Let's call her Julie. She worked as a nurse and was pretty busy. Given my job and other commitments, that worked well for me. I didn't want someone who could potentially become too clingy. Julie and I messaged each other, exchanged some pics, and talked to each other. She had a nice voice. I didn't tell her where I worked, but I realized she managed to find out where I worked. I worked as a lawyer in a local law firm, and she came to my workplace. We hadn't even gone on a date or met up yet. I wasn't happy to see her. I came out and spoke to her, and I politely asked her to not come to my workplace again, and that it made me uncomfortable. She agreed that it wasn't the best, and things seemed to go okay. I was completely put off by her behavior that I decided not to have anything to do with her. And I sent her a message later that day and told Julie that I didn't want to talk to her anymore. Looking back, I should have just ghosted her and left at that. I should have removed her and just blocked her. The next day, I go to the office and the security guy walked up to me. He told me that my friend was back again. When I turned to look at her, she was waiting outside the company property. She was just staring at me. I told the security office that I wanted nothing to do with her and to keep her away, and he agreed. I started noticing her around more and more. Eventually, I put her out of my head and I found a woman that I got along with. She always made me smile, and I decided that it was time to give it a go. We went out on a couple of dates together, and after a month or so of dating, we decided to make it official. Things were going so well, and then she called me and sounded upset when I answered. She asked if I was cheating on her, and this took me by surprise. No, I answered her. She told me that someone called Julie messaged her on Facebook and told her that we were together. My girlfriend believed me and told her to fuck off. She kept trying to contact her, and then she disappeared. It took months of Julie harassing my girlfriend before she finally disappeared. I don't know why or how, and I don't care. All I'm happy about is Julie being out of my life. This happened at my previous job, and it's a bit long, so bear with me. I'm 24 and female, by the way. Howard was a senior in my team. One day during chit-chat, he asked me to recommend some colognes to him, as I know a lot about perfumes and fragrances. I recommended some, and then he asked me to help him buy it. I suggested it's better to try it out in person before buying for colognes. But he insisted many times that I buy my recommendation for him. So I did eventually. And after I bought it, I WhatsApped him the receipt, and he texted back, "Thanks, I'll treat it as a gift from you." He did pay me back later, so I thought he's just making a joke. The manager of my previous team, Alfred, asked me to go grab a drink after work another day as he noticed that I was frustrated at work lately. He also said that I could invite more people if I wanted. So, I invited Kate, my closest friend in the company, who was also in Alfred's team. Kate suggested to me to invite one more colleague as she believed it was better to hang out in a group of 4. I think for a bit, and then I invited Howard as he had worked under Alfred before. I told Howard that Alfred wanted to buy all of us drinks. I have drinks with Kate and another colleague Aiden together regularly after work, so that was the first time that I hang out with either Alfred or Howard. After the drinks, we decided to take the last scheduled subway home. Only Howard and I live in the same direction, and I knew he lived near stop A from previous chit-chat, which is about 10 stops before my stop. I live quite far away from the subway station, around a 1-hour walking distance, so I planned to take taxi after getting off at my stop. After we got on the subway, Howard started to say things that made me uncomfortable. For instance, he asked when he could become as close to me as Aiden, or whether Aiden had been ever to my apartment. To be honest, I wasn't even that close with Aiden, and we were more like work friends. I was annoyed by all those questions, but I thought to myself, it's just a few more stops till stop A, and I'd have my pee soon. Well, Howard didn't get off at stop A. I asked him about it, to which he replied that he had some errands near stop B tomorrow morning, so he would be staying at a friend's near stop B. Stop B is just 1 stop before my stop. Luckily, Howard shut up soon, probably because of my lack of response, so I just looked at my phone in silence. I just noticed Howard was still there when I was about to get off at my stop. He followed me off the subway and offered to take taxi together. He said he would drop me off at my place and then go to his friend's place, which would make no sense as these 2 drop-off points are in complete opposite directions at my subway stop. So I declined by saying that I planned to walk home. Then, he offered to walk me home. I said it's an hour away, and I persuaded him to just get a taxi outside my subway stop. He finally budged and called a taxi through the app, which shows the estimated fare. I overheard him murmuring the amount, which was definitely more than traveling from my subway stop to stop B, more like traveling to stop A. I suspected that the stay at his friend thing was a lie all along, just to follow me home. A week later, Kate told me that she overheard Howard insinuated to Alfred that we were in a relationship. We were in a profession where relationships between staff are required to be reported and spouses cannot work in the same team. I was creeped out by Howard but didn't bring it up to Alfred as he didn't ask me about it either. A month later, Alfred invited his team and a lot of other people that he previously worked with to dinner just to celebrate the end of a project. And after the meal, Alfred asked me where I was heading to as he knew I have 2 apartments. Kate and Howard were walking with us. I then told Alfred that I'm going back to the apartment in the same direction of Kate's, which was in the opposite direction as Howard's. Howard joined in the conversation and said that he's going to that direction too, as a friend was hosting a party there. Kate and I were doubtful surely. On the subway, Kate asked him where the party was, and Howard replied at stop C, which was exactly my stop. So, Kate and I pretended that we had other places to hang out and that I was not getting off at Stop C. Howard got off at Stop C, and eventually I rode with Kate to her stop and then got on another subway back to Stop C. I avoided him as much as possible before I could quit my job since then. I've quibbled with the thought of publicly sharing my story for a while now. Recently, I've arrived at a place where I think the benefit of sharing outweighs the risk. So, I'm taking a chance and just putting it out there. Maybe it will help someone. Many times I've looked back on the odd events leading up to the scariest night of my life, October 5th, 2015. I'd like to say that I did everything right, but honestly, in hindsight, I should have done more. I am convinced that my son, who was 3.5 years old at that time, actually saved me from harm that night. I could have easily become another statistic in the crime database, and although my stalker did not hurt me physically, it took me months to get past the psychological damage. So, here's my story. In May of 2012, I temporarily exited the workforce following the birth of my son, Chris. He was born with a physical birth defect that would require multiple corrective surgeries during his first year of life. He was also born 2.5 months early, which had complicated things further. Chris's father, Aaron, agreed that I should stay home with our son until he was 1 year old, considering our circumstances. In May of 2013, I felt comfortable enough to leave my son with a babysitter, so I went job hunting. I ended up being hired on the spot as a waitress at a small but very popular chain restaurant in my little town. Let's just say that this little diner is widely known for their waffles, and let's just leave it at that. I was hired on to work on the second shift, and after 2 months, I had worked my way up to the first shift. By the summer of 2014, I had a long built-up clientele of regular customers that enjoyed my service and tipped me well, enough for me to have a little putback in savings, which came in handy when Aaron and I broke up. I ended up moving out of our apartment with Chris and renting a small 2-bedroom trailer in the same town. It was mid-November of 2014 when I first met Ryan, the man who would later stalk me. It was an abnormally slow Saturday morning shift at the diner. 2 men, one late 40s, early 50s, and the other maybe early 20s. They walked into the diner together and sat down in my section. They were my only customers at that time. So, when the older man of the two started making small talk, I had time. The older man introduced himself to me as Ryan, and the younger man with him was his son. Right away, by his body language and tone, I could tell that Ryan was being flirtatious with me. He even cracked a cliché joke saying, "Nah, there's no way you work here because you're too pretty and you have all your teeth." Honestly, I wasn't super amused with that tired kind of humor. And while Ryan was decent in the looks department, I was a little annoyed with being casually hit on by him. I was 25 years old at that time and much closer to his son's age. But nevertheless, I faked merriment because a happy customer equals a better tip. It's just part and parcel to the job. Suffice to say that my fake laughing and smiling paid off, earning me a $10 tip on a $20 ticket. They were only there for 30 minutes too. Not too bad, I thought to myself. The following weekend, Ryan came back to the diner. This time, he came alone. There was nothing unusual about this interaction than from the last. I took his order, We chit-chatted when I had time, and I kept his coffee refilled, and that was it. But apparently, he enjoyed his experience because again, he left me a $12 tip on an $8 ticket. Ryan began visiting the diner every weekend from then on, up until the end of December. And by then, he had started coming 2 to 3 times per week. At this point, he really started showing an interest in getting to know me. Now, that's not something unusual per se. I had some other regulars that I actually developed friendships with, some even getting me Christmas gifts and such. So, I did tell him things about myself in casual conversation during his visits. Just normal things that normal people talk about. And one of the things that I eventually told him about was the medical miracle that is my son. I even bragged about the fantastic job his doctors did, showing him the before and after photos of his surgeries. And over those past several weeks, Ryan's attitude towards me had changed. He was no longer this annoying, flirty middle-aged guy, but rather a seemingly caring person. Maybe I was naive, but I genuinely appreciated his kindness, and I did not interpret it as romantic gesture at all. And Ryan continued coming by on my shifts for breakfast 3 times a week. February of 2015 is when the first strange event occurred, which was soon followed by a string of more. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had picked Chris up from the babysitter, and I was heading home from work. Now, where I lived was on a small uphill dead-end road. As you pulled onto my road from the main highway, you could easily see my trailer on the right side at the top of the hill. It was positioned perpendicular to the road, and the back side of it is visible as you drive up the road. And as I eased my way up the hill, something immediately caught my eye. I could clearly tell that my back door was open. I put the brakes on immediately and tried to figure out what to do. I literally never touch or unlock that door, much less open it. So I knew something was off. A door is not going to unlock and open all by itself. I ended up parking my car off to the side of the road and calling Aaron. At this point, we were on good terms and co-parenting our son very well, and Aaron came straight over and checked out my trailer, while I remained back in my vehicle with Chris. About 5 minutes after entering, he called me and told me that it was all clear. So, I made my way up the hill expecting to have been robbed or something. But nothing was missing. There was no damage to the door, so Aaron basically brushed things off saying that I must have forgotten to close the door myself or something. I knew better, but since there was no sight of a break-in, I let it go. 2 days after that, so on Saturday afternoon, I'm off work. I'm heading uphill on the road toward my driveway. My son is spending the weekend with his dad, so I have the house to myself that evening. A wave of relief washes over me as I see that my back door is still closed. Now, I don't know why I decided to do this, but something compelled me to actually inspect the door up close. I needed to also make sure that it wasn't tampered. But to my horror, I discovered that it had. There were pry marks along the edge of the door jamb. I immediately went inside and unlocked the door so I could open it and inspect further. The edge of the door was bent to hell and back on the inside where the doorknob met the jamb. That damage wasn't there 2 days ago when Aaron installed the new lock. I deduced that someone had probably been using that credit card trick to easily break into that door, since the way it locked was by the knob. And when they figured out that it would no longer work, they tried to open it, not knowing that a new lock was on the other side of the door. I'm thankful that lock held. At this point, I called the police and made a report. They basically told me that there wasn't much that they can do in this instance, other than document the incident, and they told me to call if anything else happened. Needless to say, that wasn't satisfactory to me, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't feel comfortable sleeping at home that night, so I ended up making the hour drive to my parents' house and crashing there. Nothing else happened for a little while, and by March, I had been able to put February's events behind me and feel secure in my home again. I was working and going about life as usual, and at this point, Ryan had begun visiting the diner 5 days a week. Oddly enough, he was there each shift that I worked, and it became a running joke with the other waitresses, and in a funny way they teased me about having a stalker. Well, I would soon find out just how true that actually was. Because in April, things got weird. I came home from work one day to find my grass had been mowed. Now, I usually paid a neighbor to do it for me since I didn't have a lawnmower. My yard was small, but maintaining it was a requirement for my lease agreement. My neighbor didn't charge much to mow it, and he needed the extra cash, so it was a win-win for us. But I knew that I hadn't asked my neighbor to mow recently, so I thought that it was strange. I asked him if he went ahead and decided to do it anyway, and he said that he hadn't. So I called my landlord and asked her if she had mowed my grass for some reason. I knew my grass hadn't been high enough to warrant that, but it was the only possible explanation. Of course, she said no. She hadn't mowed my grass and I was stumped. I then assumed that an anonymous neighbor must have mowed my grass out of the goodness of their heart. You know, like a pay it forward kind of thing. I mean, what else was I to think? And all throughout April and the beginning of May, my grass was being anonymously mowed once per week. I know it sounds strange reading it, but at that time, I genuinely thought a neighbor was just doing neighborly things and didn't want to be recognized for it. On May 5, 2015, Aaron and I decided to take Chris to the zoo. When we got back from the zoo late that afternoon, we discovered that my front door was cracked open. Now, my front door did have a deadbolt, but I must have forgotten to lock it. How freaking stupid of me. You can imagine how upset I was due to my back door being tampered with multiple times back in February. I just didn't understand why this was happening again. And like all the other times, nothing was taken. My belongings seemed untouched. Yes, I was feeling targeted, but I didn't call the police because I felt like I technically had nothing to report. There was nothing stolen or vandalized, just an open front door. So, I let it go again. And 2 days later, I would discover the depth of things. May 7, 2015. It was one of my rare off days, and I was at home relaxing with the diner called me. I answered thinking maybe my boss wanted me to come into work. Well, it wasn't my boss, but my coworker Celia. She stated that someone named Mary called the diner asking to speak to me. Mary had asked for me by name, and since I wasn't at work that day, Mary left her phone number and requested that I call her as soon as possible. I thanked Celia for relaying the message, and I ended the call perplexed. I didn't know who Mary was, but out of curiosity, I gave her a call, and Mary ended up being Ryan's estranged wife. I didn't even know he was married. She informed me that Ryan had a nervous breakdown while they were arguing earlier. He started raving like a wild man about how I'm a better girlfriend than she is a wife. He told her that we were in love and that he had been taking care of me and my Down syndrome son for months. My son doesn't even have Down syndrome, by the way. My son's not mentally impaired. She initially thought that it was all just crazy talk considering his mental state. He mentioned where I worked, he said we were going to get married, and he said that I had asked him to adopt my son. He said that he was going to run away with me in order to get away from her. He even told her that he started visiting me after following me home one day. And when he said that, Mary knew that something was very wrong. Ryan had somewhat of a history with mental issues, and Mary was used to him weaponizing things to hurt her feelings during arguments, even if those things are lies. But she said that this time was different. She knew that he had started frequenting the diner, and red flags went way up for her when he admitted to following someone home. So, she decided to call the diner to see if anyone by my name worked there. When Celia confirmed this, Mary perceived the possible danger, and she left me her name and number requesting a callback. My head was spinning at this point. While things were finally starting to make sense, I was still gobsmacked. And at one point in the conversation, Mary mentioned my grass being mowed. Yes, Ryan even flaunted the yard work that he did for me in her face. It was all very strange and very surreal. Basically, Ryan has been obsessing over me for months. He became delusional and had created a whole relationship between me and him in his mind. And it was all in his head. And obviously, he was the one that was breaking into my home when I was gone. Why he did it, I still haven't pieced that 100% together. He never took anything, and I imagine he was mowing my grass because that was his little way of taking care of me. Anyway, by the end of the call, I decided to go to the police department in person to file a report about Ryan. I thought that at the very least, this is harassment, and I needed it documented. Maybe I could even get a restraining order. Mary offered to provide an official statement to the police as well, to which I thanked her. The PD took our statements, and the harassment complaint was filed. And although I couldn't get a PO based off my statement alone, the officer did assure me that he would personally go talk to Ryan. I then went straight to the diner to inform my boss Chase about the situation. Now, Chase took this very seriously. Just that morning, a third shift waitress actually brought up to Chase how a man came to the diner very early, at around 4 a.m., and this man was trying to get her to tell him which days I'd be working that week. She told Chase it made her uncomfortable. So when I told Chase about Ryan, he went back and looked at the cameras from that morning. And sure enough, the man that was bothering third shift for info about me was Ryan. So Chase initiated the process through corporate to get a permanent ban on Ryan from the diner, and it was approved at a later date. I was scheduled to work the following day, and I was nervous throughout my entire shift. But thankfully, Ryan didn't show up, nor did he show up the following day or the next day after that. And all was quiet at my home as well. The officer showing up at Ryan's house to speak with him must have spooked him enough to stop. Weeks, then months went by, and no Ryan in sight. No vandalism at my home, no mysteriously mown grass, nothing. My life had completely gone back to normal. But things changed again in October. October 5th, 2015. It was around 8 p.m. My son Chris fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie, and I had dozed off as well, until I heard a few very light knocks at my front door. I then walked to the kitchen and looked out at the only window that faces my driveway. No cars there except my own, so I figured that the light tapping that I had heard at my door was either just the TV or my half-asleep brain playing tricks on me. I then returned to the couch and started playing a game on my phone. But about 5 minutes later, I heard a few light knocks on my door again. This time, I was wide awake, so I knew that my brain wasn't playing tricks. So I walked back over to my kitchen window to double-check the driveway to see who was there. Again, my car was the only one in my driveway. And right as I go to close the kitchen window blinds, loud knocking suddenly erupts at my front door. And I mean loud, angry banging. I guess my instincts kicked in and I sprinted to the couch. I scooped Chris up into my arms and I ran down the hallway to his bedroom. I did the only thing that I could think of in that fraction of a moment. He was groggy and confused, but he listened to my instructions. I said, "Get under your bed and stay under your bed and don't come out until I tell you to." I then ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife while dialing 911. I actually screamed at the door that I was calling the cops in hopes that it would scare them away. I positioned myself at the end of the hallway, which connects to my son's room to the living room. This way, I'd have a clear view of both the front door and my son's bedroom doorway. As the operator picked up my call, the banging on my front door was getting even louder. 911 said she was dispatching police right away, and she instructed me to stay on the line until they arrived. About 12 minutes into the call, the banging got more violent, rattling pictures off the wall, and I thought for sure that they would break my door down at any moment. 911 asked me where I was located in the home, and I told her. She asked me if I could hide somewhere, and she told me not to put myself in danger. And in that tiny moment, I felt enraged. Hell no, I'm not going to hide. I'm not taking my eyes off my son's bedroom under any circumstance. Where are the cops? And besides, I lived in a small trailer, and the only hiding place for an adult is my bedroom closet, which I'd be easily found. So, I just interrupted over the phone. "Look, lady, I'm a single mom. I have no man, no gun, and no place to hide. If he breaks this door down, what am I supposed to do? Throw this knife at him? Where are the effing cops?" She assured me again that the cops were on their way and to stay on the line. More banging, but this time, it moved to the actual side of the trailer. It sounded like they were taking a baseball bat and beating against the outside of the trailer. At that moment, Chris started shrieking. I ran the few steps over into his room to check on him. The loud commotion had just pushed his fear gauge over the edge, and he was screaming and crying incessantly under his bed. I quickly ascertained that he was physically okay, and I returned back to the end of the hallway to check on the front door. As I was explaining to 911 that my son was okay, just scared, I noticed that the banging had suddenly stopped. I waited another minute or so, trying to listen out for any sign of further escalation, like maybe a window breaking or something. But all I could hear was sobs coming from my son's room. All in all, it took the cops 23 minutes to arrive, and by then the perp was long gone. For reference, I live about 10 minutes away from the police station, and 911 even called it in as an active home invasion, and I was livid about the response time. My front door was made out of some type of metal, just a cheap generic trailer door, but now it was covered in dents. There were noticeable scratch marks on the lock, and the siding of the trailer was damaged where the perp had hit with something. Given the history, I immediately suspected Ryan was the perp. The police said that since I didn't actually see the person, then they couldn't arrest him without an eyewitness. The most that they could do was make a report, and they did end up canvassing the immediate area in case he was on foot. However, there was no sign of him or anyone around and about. I deduced that he probably had parked nearby out of sight. That way, his vehicle wouldn't be spotted or recognized at my home. My home was situated next to a thin patch of woods that has public access roads on the other side. I also am absolutely convinced that Ryan had nefarious plans for me that evening, but when he discovered that my son was at home with me, he bailed. He stopped trying to break into my home that moment that my son made his presence known. For whatever reason, Ryan always lit up when I talked about my son. He used to initiate conversations about Chris just to watch me dote over him. And looking back, I guess it was his morbid way of bonding with my child. and I think in his own warped way, he grew to care about him. So when he heard Chris scream, he decided not to follow through with whatever his plan was for me. I ended up taking a few days off work because I was so shaken up. I stayed at my parents' house during that time because I was afraid to go home, and my landlord had the damaged door replaced while I was gone. Realizing that I had a job and a life and that I couldn't stay gone forever, I knew that I had to go home. So I got a gun, a small caliber revolver, but it would do the job. And then I went home. I lived in that trailer for another 4 months before I saved enough money to move. It was totally peaceful during those months, with no further events or altercations. But I just couldn't stand being there anymore. And since then, I had changed jobs, met someone special, got engaged, bought a house, and then got a dog. No further sign of Ryan anywhere during any of these life changes. And it's been nearly 7 years since any sign of him. Ryan seems to have disappeared out of my life in the same manner that he first appeared, out of nowhere. And I couldn't be happier that he's gone. Hopefully, it stays that way. And here are the top comments from my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.